Hi, my name is Sarah Powers, and this is my TOK presentation. To begin, what I will be discussing today is the COVID-19 crisis and the lack of ventilators. As we are currently in the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitals nationwide are needing to treat the mass amount of people sick with the virus. One issue that has come out of this is we realize we do not have enough ventilators to treat everybody who needs one. This has led to doctors needing to prioritize certain patients, which leads to a life or death decision being made. Although the situation is very unfortunate, doctors are doing what they were trained to do and trying to get through this pandemic the best way they can. Although patients are dying, doctors are trying their best to make sure those who can survive do and treating every patient to the best of their ability. One interesting thing in public we are seeing are which factors make one person more likely to get a ventilator than another. This leads me to my central knowledge question. In what ways do natural science and human sciences affect the reasoning used to make life or death decisions? Thinking through this within the lens of natural science, it's referring to the health, age, and ability of a person. Next, thinking through this in human science, it can help us understand how as people we prioritize. Thinking through this further, when we think about shared knowledge, it can help us to understand what the doctor knows about one's condition, what we know about health, and what they learned through medical school. Secondly, bias can help us understand our knowledge on ability, our trust in the doctors, and their personal experience and how their bias affects it. Next, fact, whether we think someone has a good chance of life or if it has been proven that they have a lesser chance based on science. Finally, through personal knowledge, it can help us understand how one doctor's experience alters his decision-making process and the way he ranks patients. This leads me into my second knowledge question. What role does natural science play in the way we define a life? Through this, it brought me to my second real-life situation. The Alabama governor banning all abortions with no exceptions on May 15, 2019. Doctors who conducted an abortion could receive jail time for up to 99 years. This would have been the strictest anti-abortion ban in the United States. This situation has been temporarily blocked by a federal judge, for it would be the first state to have absolutely no exceptions and was thought to violate the Constitution. This seems unjust, for there are many cases in which a woman cannot or should not carry a child. Thinking through this, using natural science as a lens, it can help us understand when we define a fetus as a human and until what stage of a pregnancy is it unlawful to terminate. Through this, we know during pregnancy, the heartbeat starts at week 7 and the brain develops at week 8. Thinking through this further, looking at it through bias can help us understand how a political party can also cause a large bias, because our current president, Donald J. Trump, has a very strong stance in this situation and is very pro-life, which can lead somebody to leaning one way or the other. Also within bias, being a man or a woman can cause you to have a different perspective on this situation. Men and women have very different places in this disagreement, as women carry the child and men don't, but statistically, more men are pro-life than women. Thinking through this, looking at our perception on why an abortion would be necessary is us sympathizing with the unborn child and their lack of choice whether or not they would like to be terminated. Next, religious knowledge systems can help us understand how one's belief can affect their decision on whether an abortion is lawful or not. Next, through emotion, it can help us understand when deciding how we prioritize life and how we have to take into account our experience and opinions and how we make a life or death decision. Going back and thinking about this through ethics, by our knowledge on natural science, do we define life at as little as a heartbeat? Because if so, we have animals who have a heartbeat. Is that inhumane? Or do we define life as a brain or a working nervous system? Because in that place, plants can be considered an important life form. Using ethics to think through my knowledge question of what role does natural science play in the way we define a life, as I just stated, it answers the question of, based on whether or not you define a life by a heartbeat or nervous system, which stage of a pregnancy, if any, one would justify an abortion. And this leads me into my next knowledge question, what roles do emotion and reason play in justifying purposeful killing? And through this, I came up with my third real-life situation, vegetarianism, eating animals versus eating plant-based projects. Vegetarianism has been a fight for decades, as the question of is it morally unjust to kill animals for our own enjoyment has gone unanswered. Everybody needs to eat. Some people may not have the facilities to go vegetarian and other way around, or maybe it's just about if they want to make the choice or not. As we begin to find an answer for this question, thinking through this, if we use the lens of emotion, it helps us see how we connect with the animal, how we take into account the process of slaughtering and the conditions they are kept in order to provide us with enough meat. Next, thinking through this with reason, how do we rationalize why we need to eat the animal and justifying the mistreatment of murder for our own enjoyment? Next, if we think about this through religious knowledge systems, in some religions, eating meat is considered a rite of passage, and they make use of the entire animal in order to give back the life they took from it. Does this make it ethically okay, since technically there isn't a waste, and while the animal is alive, they are giving it the life it deserved? In some religions, Judaism for example, they don't eat pork. which brings up the question of what makes pigs any more worthy of life than a cow, for example. In Judaism, further, a rabbi must bless the cow, and it must be slaughtered in an ethical way. So through this lens, if they have a good life and there isn't a bad process for getting the meat from the animal, would that make it okay? Using these to answer my knowledge question, if we think about the conditions and process of slaughtering an animal, and if they are all done in a humane, ethical way, it can make those who eat meat feel more comfortable about their decision, and for those who are vegetarian because of animal cruelty, it can help justify killing these animals to provide as a food source. In conclusion, if we go back to my original real-life situation, thinking through primarily with human science, natural science, and ethics, it can guide doctors in the future in morally justifying the decisions they are making through their own personal knowledge. Also, in the future, we can understand the reasoning process made by doctors, and they may be able to be applied to other situations in the future. We can use this experience as shared knowledge and create a new normal. One bias I am seeing that can come into play is whether or not one has a high-risk person in their family. If a doctor has a family member who could become gravely ill if stricken with the virus, it may lead them to sympathize with other patients in the same situation and give a ventilator to a patient with a lower risk of survival. Next, another area of knowledge which could change one's perspective on the situation could be looking at this through mathematics. If going through this virus, we don't prioritize the elderly, it will skew our population to a much younger average age. Going further, if we compare my second and third knowledge question, what role does natural science play in the way we define life, and what roles do emotion and reason play in what we eat? They are both referring to which lives are more valuable to us as humans, and using our human sciences as a way of knowing, we can further use this to answer my original real-life situation and understand better why doctors choose to prioritize certain patients over others. Throughout this, I did acknowledge a few biases I had. The first one being, I would consider myself pro-choice, so I had to take a step back and think through my second real-life situation from the lens of natural science. As well as that, I recognize another bias I had with myself in the third real-life situation, as I do eat meat. Looking at this through the lens of religious knowledge systems, it helped me deepen my understanding of how that affects one's personal knowledge and how it can be carried other to further answering my original real-life situation. Looking back at my second and third knowledge questions, what role does natural science play in the way we define life, and what roles do emotion and reason play in justifying purposeful killing? Considering both of those questions brought us to question how we prioritize lives over others, it can help us understand how doctors are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis and understand and answer my original knowledge question, in what ways do natural science and human sciences affect the reasoning used to make life or death decisions?